Hey guys, it's Gary. Obviously, not an imposter. I'm back. I was just about to record a video a little while ago, and up popped a new video that Carm Gorvo31 made, so I had to go watch that first, naturally. Um, what I really like about what's been going on in our little circle lately is that we're getting to discuss things that aren't just specific albums, but rather things that are music related to us, maybe not to other people, our little habits and rituals and things like that. I'm so glad to see people. I'm not the only one burning incense, and that there's a connection with music there. You know, a lot of us are burning incense while we listen to music and get these interconnected associations. As well as books. You know, people lately have been, well, Carm started it actually, I guess, in our circle. And I picked up on it showing books, favorite books that we like. A lot of them for us, because we're so into music, are music related somehow, either, write-ups on histories of certain types of music or biographies on musicians. I love to see people pick up on that. However, what I'm discussing here is something that just came to me last night. So I didn't do a lot of preparation for this. I grabbed 9 albums, literally every one of them, I think, except one I've shown before. So it's a bit of a repeat in terms of I'm not showing you things you haven't seen. But rather, last night, I put on Bill Connor's Swimming with a Hole in My Body. I listened to that full album, which I have on CD. It's loaded on my computer. This wonderful, this is my favorite album by him. Solo album, ECM. Actually, a lot of what I'm showing is ECM stuff. Recorded August 1979 for the ECM label. It's all Bill Connors, all solo, just steel string and nylon string guitars. And it led to, now I've listened to this album hundreds of times. I bought this when it was relatively new, shortly after it was released. I've been listening since then. I have the CD of it as well. But listening to it last night was not a different experience, but something dawned on me that I thought I would put into a video. And that is, there's certain albums that I have that are almost like taking a hallucinogenic drug. You put the music on, and you cannot prevent it from taking you somewhere else. It creates an atmosphere. Now, this is kind of hard to explain, because many albums, actually probably just about any album I have that I still listen to today, that is something that I bought, way back in the 70s and early 80s especially, I automatically put them on and have a lot of associations with them, generally at the time that I first got them. And then over the years, maybe too, if I went on a listening binge and I started listening to a particular album again, a bunch of times sequentially, maybe even many years after I initially bought it, it might dredge up the memories from that second time, that I got it back into my playlist again 5 or 10 years later, whatever. So I think, most albums that I loved back then that I listened to a lot, that I still pull out and listen to now, they all have associations with those times, and it's really, really impossible to separate that from the music listening experience. I have that with these 9 albums I'm going to show as well, but there's something else, in addition to all the memories that are dredged up by these albums, and this is certainly one of them. This is the one that triggered the whole subject matter. And that is albums that are, like I said, almost like taking a hallucinogenic drug and trying to fight off the effects, You can't do it. I can't put any of these albums on without them creating a complete atmosphere and mood in the room. And, also tied in with that are all my memories of the albums, but that's something in addition and separate to it. Now, literally all of these albums are favorite albums of mine, but it's not necessarily true that a favorite album of mine will necessarily do this. A lot of them do. There's something in the music itself, I think, in addition to what goes on in my head when I play it, that creates this, it's almost like burning incense and trying not to smell what's coming out of there, and maybe some albums would be incense that don't have a scent, say, and you burn them anyway, but they don't have a scent, and then others have a very specific scent that forces you to remember the same thing every time you smell that. I don't know how to explain that. But literally all of these albums are favorite albums of mine. Like I said, it's not necessarily true that every favorite album of mine this is going to be the case. There's some albums that are simply, memory triggers, and maybe they've got a bit of atmosphere or a lot of atmosphere, but that's not the overriding thing. But this group of albums, and as I come across others, I'll pull them out. The ones that came to mind first are the ones that I pulled out. I chose 9 of them. I'm going to speak for an hour on each one. I'm kidding. The Bill Connors, Swimming with a Hole in My Body. I'll tell you the one thing that I've noticed about all of these albums, though, and I think, well, the thing is that I noticed that these are all essentially very quiet, subtle albums musically. I don't really, I guess because they're quiet, essentially quiet, low-key things, introspective things, that they lend you to, to go within yourself maybe, that creates, obviously it's probably me that's creating this atmosphere. I think it's the music, I don't know. But there's something about the music that kind of invites you in. It's not so much coming out of you, or is body music, like rhythmic music would be, something with a lot of drums that you feel the rhythm and the pulse of first. This is more, I won't say intellectual, but rather music that is inside, that you kind of project yourself into instead of it coming out at you maybe so much. Because I just noticed when I pull these all have a lot of the same qualities, even though the instrumentation is quite different. And I didn't even look, but very few of them have like much drums to them at all, much percussion at all. And the one that I'm thinking of that does is the one that perhaps is a little less effective in this way, but still does it for me. But anyway, and all of these records are records I highly recommend, though I'm thinking most of the people watching my videos are either going to know these albums very well, already have them, or probably know the artist at very least. This and all these I can't recommend highly enough. Bill Connors, Swimming with a Hole in My Body. This is the one that triggered it for me, and really is the one that said, oh yeah, that can be a subject for a video, whatever. I wish I was more literate like Harm, that I could, hopefully you're getting my point here, what I mean by this atmosphere, because I'm absolutely certain that others experience it. Maybe they would put it in different words. I have certain albums that as soon as they put on, it almost like puts a stop to everything else that's going on in your mind, and you focus in on the music. And like I said, not because it's a physical body pumping rhythm thing, but rather it draws you in. These are in no particular order. I showed literally all of these before except one. Here's another one. And this is very apparent, Eberhard Weber's Fluid Russell. This is very apparent from the very first notes of the first song, Quiet Departures. I'm going to include a couple links. I didn't think to hunt all of them down beforehand, but I know 2 of these albums, this one and the Bill Connors, are up in full here on YouTube. The others, there's individual songs around. So if you put the title of the album in and the artist, you'll find an individual song here and there. But all of Fluid Russell, it's about 38, 39 minutes long. Bill Connors, which is about 43 minutes long, is there. The Harold Budd I'm going to show is there. Here's another one. And again, quiet. There's no real. There's a couple light sequences where you hear something that sounds a bit like a bass drum, but there really is no percussion. This is music for essentially Gary Burton is the one that sets the mood with playing a pattern on the vibes at the beginning of the first side, which is a 17.5-minute piece, Quiet Departures. As soon as I hear the vibes kick in, which is the first thing, it's like immediate. That atmosphere and that mood is there. So it's just got the vibes. Gary Burton on vibes and marimba. Eberhard Weber on the bass. He wrote all the pieces. Bill Frisell's first actual appearance on record on guitar. He doesn't play really too much chordal guitar. He's reading parts. I'm pretty sure it's more single note stuff. It's more coloring. It's more like he's filling in these little spaces. So he doesn't play the chords. So the main harmonic thing is really coming from Gary Burton's vibes. His playing is very sparse, pretty much limited to single notes on the guitar. He plays I think it's a Greek instrument, the balalaika, in one part only, where he does strum a chord. A single chord that's like the only rhythmic thing he plays throughout the whole album. But it's a really good section, but it's just one section on the whole album. And two voices doing wordless vocals. These pieces are totally written out by the great Norma Winstone and Bonnie Herman. I think Bonnie Herman was a singer with a group called Singers Unlimited, I'm pretty sure. And Norma Winstone, you should probably all know Norma Winstone. And their pieces are very much written out, and their voices are used very much like either a string section or a couple horns would be. Horns playing written parts in harmony with each other. Beautiful album, very subtle. And again, one of those, as soon as you hear the vibe start, as soon as you hear the music start, it transports you somewhere else. And again, most of it's kind of that introspective thing. Another one, and this is definitely my top favorite albums ever, and I've talked endlessly about this, and other people show this. Vinyl Spin Jeff, I don't think anybody in the U.S. really had copies of this. I got this as a French import in 1978, I think I bought it. And it was on STIP Records. I had never heard of Terry Riley, had no idea he was an American. I thought he was a European because it was a film soundtrack. I believe it's Terry Riley playing all the instruments. Mainly it's, I don't know if it's a Hammond organ, but it's a dual keyboard organ. And the variety of sounds that Riley gets on one organ on this is incredible. He uses all different kinds. Sometimes it's, the organ sound you would expect. Other times there's a percussive sound to it. And if you've ever seen the old school organs, which I love, they have those drawbars on them. And by pulling out and changing the drawbars, there's a ton of drawbars, you actually subtly change the sound. And Riley does a lot. You don't get tired. It's only 31 minutes, but you don't get tired of hearing the organ on every track because there's so much variation in sound. It's my favorite organ album ever. It's my favorite Terry Riley album ever. And it's probably my favorite album ever. And this is the one I waited the longest forever for it to come out on CD. Of all the albums I had, I think I was dying for it to be reissued on CD. I wore this out a little bit. The funny thing is I only played the vinyl to make cassette copies of it, but over the years I made so many cassette copies of it for myself to listen to. I still wore out the vinyl. So it was really nice to, finally have it released a few years ago on CD. And actually, I saw the movie, too, as a matter of fact. Odd movie. Soundtrack works well in it. Beautiful. Again, pretty introspective. Jeff showed this recently in his summer songs that he associates with summer. And there is a track on here called In the Summer. And I'll be damned if maybe it's a title and maybe it's my head, But then Jeff noticed it too. There is a summer sound to it. There's a bit of Terry Riley's voice in the background, kind of. And it does sound like the summer. It sounds like the sun beating down just by holding out some sustained organ chords. And, the title suggests it. Maybe that's why my head went there. But when Jeff pulled this out as a summer selection song, and I'm like, maybe it's not my imagination. Maybe that really does sound like summer. Incredible music, incredible album. And again, it's one of those things that as soon as the first notes pop up, it's like, I'm in this different place. Yes, I have all those associations with my old, the time when I bought I actually probably more than almost any album. I remember the day that I went to the record store to buy this. I remember just the only album I bought that day. Driving home, wondering what it sounded like. Was it going to be a good album? Was it going to be as good as I hoped it would be? Not knowing who Terry Riley was, not knowing the movie, not knowing anything but the background picture of him sitting at the keyboard and figuring, this might be like primarily a keyboard album. That was total guesswork on my part. And just listening to it and just, wow, I can remember going to my room and listening to it like, oh, wow, this is great. And I still feel that way about it. But it's also one of those that has this vibe, this atmosphere that completely takes you there. It's like being sucked into a vortex. You can't not go into it, when the music starts. Another one I've shown before. And this is a very innovative album for me because I had bought prior Bar Phillips albums. And his prior albums, which are great classics, they had percussion on them, even Terje Repdal's guitar, and percussion, drums. So coming from a rock place, which I was at the time that I was getting into this stuff in the late 70s, there were instruments that I could grasp a hold of that were familiar to me amongst the unfamiliar ones. Well, through his prior two ECM albums, though, I became such a fan of Bar Phillips that when this one came out as a new release, and this is another 1979 album recorded in 1979, just like the Bill Connors one, and I bought this as a new release. I was going kind of on faith. It's like, well, Bar Phillips, I bought two albums by him as a genius, but there's no instruments here that I have that old school association. There's no percussion, there's no drums, there's no guitar. It's just a female vocalist, for the most part. Ina Kemenos, first time I ever heard her. Incredible voice. I was floored by her talent and her voice in this, and her perfect pitch. Bar Phillips on upright bass, and John Sermon on saxophones and a little bit of synthesizer in the background. So it was kind of like, it's not synthesizer heavy at all. So it's like, gee, I don't know if I'm ready for this, but actually it became my favorite Bar Phillips album and still is to this day. And again, it's one of those ones that you're sucked in. The music starts, you're sucked in, you're in his world for as long as this thing is playing, and you're in his atmosphere. And again, no drums. There's not a physical body connection to it. It's just the music creates a world, and you're in that world, and you can't help it. Same thing, and like I said, these are all amongst my favorite albums as well. The first Azimuth album with that great cover. Again, it's also my favorite Azimuth album. Kenny Wheeler on trumpet and flugelhorn, Norma Winstone, who pops up again from the Fluid Russell album, on voice, and the late, great John Taylor on piano synthesizer, who passed away not that long ago. Very sad to hear that. And this is the only album that John Sermon played synthesizer on, and he uses a very early, very primitive sequencer on a monophonic synthesizer. So this is real early synthesizer technology. And it's brilliant. The track that's playing isn't what I was intending on playing. So I'm going to turn down the volume. What I was playing, by the way, was Harold Budd in the background. And I think it's the synthesizer that does it for me. But again, with no percussion at all in here, not even a bass. I wouldn't necessarily say introspective, because there's times when, the piano's playing a bit on the rhythmic side, but there's certainly nothing up tempo. And the music, it creates an atmosphere and a world to live in and a vibe right off the bat, and you're drawn into it. And yeah, just like all these other albums, and like many albums that I have from this time period that I bought, when they were essentially new. Here's one that was recorded in '77. I probably didn't get this until about 70, probably late '78 or '79. So I didn't get this necessarily as a new release, but it was my first Azimuth album, oddly enough. And, but it has that atmosphere. There are other albums do as well. But the fact of John's playing the synthesizer on this, and sometimes he sets up a repeating sequencer pattern, and he just lets it play. He doesn't necessarily play a lot over it all the time, and so there's times when the sequencer pattern is just repeating itself, and Norma Winstone is coming in and out with her vocals quietly and allowing a lot of space in between what she sings on there. It's a little more spacious than their other albums, which don't have synthesizer on them. I kind of wish that John would have done more with the synthesizer, especially with Norma Winstone. But again, this is one that I put on that sucks me right into that world. And the only one I have here, and I almost didn't include this one, but this one does as well, and oddly enough, this is the only one that has drums on it, and it does get fairly active percussive-wise. And maybe this one is a little bit slightly lesser than the others, and I think it may be because of the percussive thing. But it's still a great album. When I put it on, there's a world in there that it brings me into. And yeah, when the percussion, it's all Miroslav Vitas, by the way, and except on one track, the late Don Elias playing percussion. A lot of the percussion he plays is hand percussion, but the first track, there's a couple tracks, mostly it's the first track, gets fairly active, and there's a full drum kit, and it gets a little, I don't know, it's like bombastic, but excited. But Miroslav Vitas basically plays strictly the upright bass and piano and electric piano and synthesizers. That's the band, and then Don Elias is playing percussion. But I think it's that cover that helps. And I do like all of the tracks. I like the even the one with the up-tempo drum part. But maybe a little bit less than the others. This one sucks me into its own world. But when it gets quieter, it does even a better job of bringing me into its world. And I think, because this album flip-flops a little bit for me between those two, it makes me notice that it is the quieter, more subtle things that maybe create that atmosphere for me. He's got a couple tracks on here, Concerto in E minor and Sonata for a Dream, which are on the second side, which are quieter things, which are the ones that are a little bit more up. I'm in that world. So I really do, for me anyway, think it's that percussion thing. When it's wild and it's loud, it can certainly create a vibe, a mood, but I'm thinking that it may be the quietness and the subtleness of the music that draws you in instead of comes out at you. But this is one that I do like. And I almost didn't include it, but I'm thinking that if I do make this part of a series, I would have shown that eventually anyway. This was playing a little while ago. I actually have two Harold Buds. This was my first solo album I ever bought by him. It's actually his second solo album, but really the first one that is regularly in print. The first one was a bit of a kind of early, still feeling his way around what he was going to do type of thing. This one is fully formed. This is not, I read a review once that someone said that they thought it was a formative album where Harold Budd was still working out his thing that he does, but I disagree, because if this album had not been released and had been put out nowadays and you heard it, it would just sound like another Harold Budd album of recent vintage. It's mostly acoustic. There's other musicians on here playing. Harp. There's some vocals, wordless vocals. Gavin Bryars plays on here. There's percussion, but the percussion is actually marimba. There's a bunch of marimbas on here which create a nice bed. They're not playing. Marimba is a fairly percussive sounding instrument, but instead it's almost like a quiet Steve Reich vibe, where there's a bed of marimbas slowly playing, and instead of being a percussive thing, it kind of creates this nice vibe, kind of like electric piano would do if you're playing a bunch of notes on electric piano and creating this nice bed of sound. But with the exception of the only actual electric instrument on here is one or two tracks Harold Budd plays electric piano, and it creates a nice vibe with all the acoustic instruments going on. There's Celesta on here, and like I said, the harp, glockenspiel, marimbas, and beautiful alto saxophone playing by Marion Brown on one track, who was Harold Budd's favorite saxophone player, I believe. And I discovered Marion Brown through this album, through Harold Budd's love of him. This whole thing is just, well, if you know Harold Budd, it's an introspective dream. It triggers the memories to when I actually bought this in Maryland when I was visiting a friend. Even though I had seen it here in New Jersey, my friend and I went record shopping, and I'm like, I'm going to pick this up. What the hell? Even if it was defective or something, I'm not going to drive 4-5 hours back to Maryland to return it. But I bought it there, and I remember driving home with it, having not listened to it yet. Almost couldn't wait to get home to play it. Beautiful introspective album. I don't know that anybody that watches my videos wouldn't like this album if you don't already have it. Definitely listen to it here. The whole thing is up here on YouTube. If you haven't heard it, you should go out and buy a copy. This is easily still amongst his best works, I think. And again, it's one of those things that from the first notes, it creates a mood and a vibe and an atmosphere, and you're right there. Here's another one that he does, which was quite a few years later. This is 86, I believe. Pretty sure 86. The back of it's so dark it's hard to read. That I bought as a new release because I was already into Harold Budd. This one's all solo, just him on electric keyboards. That's it. A bunch of short pieces and then a long 20-minute piece. All synthesizer, I should say, not keyboards, because there's not a real acoustic piano on here. It's mostly a synthesizer album, which I love by him. Recent years, Harold Budd's done a lot of solo acoustic piano albums, and also solo electric piano albums, or kind of not the electric piano that you associate with jazz so much in the 70s, as kind of a more the modern electric pianos sound a lot like acoustic pianos, but they have little like delay effects on them and things that you can add to the sound afterwards. So Harold Budd's recent albums where he plays those are very close to an acoustic sounding piano, but with treatment added to the acoustic sound a bit after the fact. But this is purely electronic. And again, pretty much the first chord comes in and you're, boom, in that world. And I really want to try to keep this video under 3.5 hours. And my last album, I'm not even going to talk, I was going to talk about some other subjects, but I'm going to not do that now. My last album is probably the only one I've never shown before, Children Beware. And this is Steve Hackett's Bay of Kings, which this is another album. I waited for many, many, many years for it to come out on CD. Seemed like it was never going to come out on CD, and it finally did. And when it did, it even had bonus tracks and a different cover. This was a cover painted by his then-wife, Kim Poor, who there was one album that Steve made that had a photograph of him on the cover of his early albums, and I mean like his first, 10 or 12 albums or so. But most of his early album covers were very similar to the early 1970s Genesis album covers, had a lot of characters on them. Very noticeable style of artwork, cartoonish, but with characters, people on them. And they were all drawn by his wife, Kim Poor, his ex-wife, as was this one. But for some reason, when they reissued it on CD, they didn't use this cover. I don't know why. I don't think it was because they weren't married anymore, because all his other albums that she did the covers for, when they have been released on CD, they kept the original covers. But this was the first album that Steve made that wasn't really a rock album. And this was kind of the album I waited for him to make, that I knew he was going to make eventually. He spoke about it for years. And that is all, unlike his, progressive rock albums, all instrumental, but primarily, or no electric guitar, primarily acoustic guitar and classical guitar, mixture of both. And his brother John Hackett, who is a wonderful flute player, that's a great combo. His brothers, you might think his brother's on his albums just because he's his brother. But you couldn't really ask for a better combination than the flute that appears on his albums when his brother plays. Even on the progressive things, his progressive albums, the flute playing really is exemplary and really a nice addition to the sound. But there's no drum machines on here. There's no electric guitar, no vocals. This is the album that Steve always wanted to make. He had it in his head for years, knew it wouldn't be very commercial. Had to buy this as an import. I remember going to the store and seeing this. This didn't come out in the U.S. at the time. It took several years after I bought this for it to be re-released in the U.S. I think it did finally come out with this cover initially on vinyl in the U.S. I think it might have only been with the CD issue that they changed it. And what year was this from? I want to say early 80s. I want to say around, there's no copyright date on here. 83. So I would have bought it in 83. I thought it was even older than that. But like I said, Steve on acoustic and classical guitars, John Hackett on flutes, and Nick Magnus plays keyboards. There's some synthesizer on here, but the keyboards are used wonderfully, excellently. Probably this is because this is my favorite Steve Hackett album. Synthesizer used as a backdrop, almost like a string ensemble would be, but softer. Whereas today's synthesizers, you can get a very realistic cello and violin sound. In the early 80s, that wasn't still the case. So when you saw a setting on synthesizer that emulated strings, it still sounded like a synthesizer, still sounded electronic. And the strings are very soft. In this case, and in many cases, I find that actually works to the music's advantage to not really sound like an imitation of real string ensemble, but really like a softer, more ghostly string ensemble, which it works for this music. Fantastic. This is really one that, if you like that Bill Connors Swimming with a Hole in My Body and, Ralph Towner's introspective solo albums and things like this, and you're not familiar with Steve Hackett, this is the one album of his, and I've got many. And he's done now, over the years, he's finally gotten to do a whole bunch of these classical guitar instrumental solo albums, even some of them with orchestra, and they're really, really good. Even a live album he did in this setting, instrumental solo guitars. Acoustic guitars with some accompaniment, maybe a keyboard lightly playing in the background or something like that. They're all good. But there's something about the vibe and the atmosphere to this. Again, this is the one more than any of his others. That first track comes in, and I'm there. I'm in this world. Can't go wrong with any of those albums. I have them all on CD, but like I said, I like to show the vinyl because it just shows up on camera better. So, in light of the fact I haven't really shown any new albums, and I've got so many things I've never shown before, but it just struck me last night when listening to the Swimming with a Hole in My Body again, that, every time the music starts, every time, like the first two notes I hear, I'm transported somewhere else. It was like I took a pill or something. And I thought, that could be a subject for a video. And I've got many albums that fit that bill. I grabbed the ones that came immediately to mind, though, so probably the ones I showed have that association a bit more than maybe some of the others that I might show at a future time. Okay, guys, I'm keeping it short by my standards. Hope everybody's doing well. I really thank you all for your comments and your messages that you sent to me. I have to go to work again in the morning, Sunday morning again. What can I say? I don't know how much longer I'm going to last. So, guys, thanks for all your comments and everything, which have been a pillar of strength to me when I'm out there doing that horrible job on those horrible days. Appreciate all the support, and I'm looking forward to seeing more of your videos. And check out some of the music I showed. I don't think anything I showed anybody would be worse for wear for getting into if you haven't heard it yet. Okay, everybody, take care. Hope everybody's doing well, and I'll be back soon.